Load off from your busy workday and listen to the dulcet tunes of our guests, who are all over the cybersecurity landscape. We're going to ask them some hard questions, not going to lie, probably some softballs too. But no matter what, it's going to be a good time. So sit back, pour yourself a nice hot cup of coffee, or something stronger if it's that time of day, and enjoy Coffee Talk with Serge.
Hello and welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge, the interview series. I'm Audra Streetman, joined today by Eva Galperin, the Director of Cybersecurity for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Eva, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk with you about data privacy, everything to do with that, because you know quite a bit about this topic. But before we dive into that, I want to point out that we are recording this at .conf 23 at Splunk Studios here at the Venetian in Las Vegas, and I'm curious what your experience has been like so far. Have there been any highlights or anything you thought was interesting with the sessions?
Well, this is my first .conf, so definitely not my first time in Vegas, though. We're just a few weeks ahead of the security death march that is DEF CON and B-Sides and Black Hat. But I've seen a couple of really interesting talks, especially about sort of how to do security at scale at some of the larger and better resourced companies. And most of the companies that I talk to and the organizations that I talk to and even the individuals that I talk to can't afford an enormous security team. And so I'm trying to find ways in which to apply this knowledge to less well-resourced people.
Definitely. That's great. And so you'll be here back again in a month then for DEF CON.
I'm afraid so.
Yes, back in the heat of Las Vegas. So tell me a little bit about your role at EFF and kind of what you currently do.
I'm the Director of Cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I am on our Public Interest Technology team. I work with EFF's other security researchers to do long-form security research, activism, and engineering in order to protect vulnerable populations. And that can be anything from journalists to activists to LGBTQ populations to people in domestic abuse situations, and it can be anywhere from here to Ukraine to Venezuela to China.
Definitely. And when we talk about cybersecurity, oftentimes we're talking about cybercrime like ransomware or nation state activity, those types of topics, but definitely personal security is very important as well, and it's often something that could impact anyone, right?
Absolutely. And often the people that I talk to, again, can't afford a great big security team. They can't afford any security team. And so trying to encourage companies to engage in practices that protect users by default is really important to me.
Definitely, and I saw you gave a TED Talk about Stalkerware, which for anyone who's not familiar, what is Stalkerware, and what was the message behind that talk?
So Stalkerware is the class of commercially available software that is designed to be covertly installed on someone else's device in order to exfiltrate data from it. And the idea is that you can use it to get pretty much the same kind of capabilities that a nation-state actor has, provided that you have, most of the time, physical access to the device. And in stalking situations where people are being stalked by their coworkers or by a partner or by a former partner or a family member, they frequently have physical access to the device, and they frequently have the password to the device that they have either shoulder surfed or possibly even coerced out of their victim.
Yeah, and it's important to point out that with cybersecurity, it's not just some shadowy figure on a keyboard, right? It could be the person that you're in a relationship with, and I think that's really important to highlight because, like I said, it's a big problem, and we don't give it enough attention, I don't think, with Stalkerware in particular. And so I'm curious for anyone out there, what's your advice on how to best defend against Stalkerware? Is it mostly physical access to your device? Is it strong, unique passwords? What do people need to keep in mind for that?
Well, it really depends because abuse takes so many different forms. And so you really have to take into account whether or not the person that you are attempting to defend against has physical access to your device, has your passwords. If they are some distance from you, then you can change your passwords and turn on 2FA and do all of the usual things that we encourage people to do in order to lock down their accounts. But if you are still living with your abuser, or if you don't necessarily know who it is that is stalking you, that is an entirely different threat model, and it requires very different and much more complicated security advice.
Definitely, and it's not as simple as identifying that you have it on your device and then removing it, because oftentimes that abuse could escalate if you do try to remove it from your device. So in those situations, what do you recommend people do? Do they have to create, a safety plan? Because I think that's kind of the most dangerous point in time when you are in an abusive relationship. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I try not to tell survivors of abuse what to do. My goal is not to tell them what to do. It is to enable them to do what they want to do. And so survivors of abuse usually have the best estimate of their own risk and how much risk they're willing to take, and whether or not removing that program or that physical device will in fact cause their abuser to escalate to violence, or perhaps even greater violence than they're already engaging in. So that's entirely up to the survivor, and it's a very personal and individual decision.
Definitely. And in terms of even identifying that something like this is happening, what are some of the signs to look out for? Is it, battery usage, or, odd pop-ups, or how can people identify this if they're fallen victim to it?
Well, if they're using an Android device, I strongly recommend that they simply use mobile antivirus software in order to detect the stalkerware on their phone. If they are using an iOS device, there is a security checkup that you can do, which looks for the most common misconfigurations that stalkerware, which works on iOS, uses. So I strongly recommend that. Battery life is sometimes an indication, but not always. Honestly, I use some of the most old-fashioned techniques for sort of ferreting out spying, and one of them is, sort of the barium meal. You feed your potential stalker all kinds of very tasty information, and you see where it is leaking.
Yeah, that is interesting. If you notice that someone has information, how else would they have received that? Is it because they have access to this?
I mean, there are all kinds of different reasons why a person who is stalking you or abusing you may have information that you don't want them to have. It's not always stalkerware. Information leaks from all kinds of different sources, including your friends, your family, public social media posts. Sometimes the abuser still has access to the software on your car, or your lights, or your Amazon Echo in the house, or something like that. So there are so many different possible vectors for spying that it's important to sort of approach it in the same way that we approach hunting down an APT, which is that you go through each of the vectors and you slowly eliminate them one by one and lock things down one at a time.
And so when you do identify this on a system, do you do a factory reset? Do you need to get an entirely different device? I mean, is it difficult to remove in most cases?
Most stalkerware is actually pretty easy to remove once you get it. But finding it in the first place can be really challenging. And again, there are all kinds of ways to spy that don't involve stalkerware, some of which can be very difficult to remove. And worst of all, if someone has compromised your accounts, then getting a new phone is not going to do much. And furthermore, telling a survivor of abuse that they need to drop $1,000 on a new phone is not always advice that they can act on.
Right. And it's such a privacy violation. And this is, I guess, a personal anecdote, but I have also had an experience with this in my early 20s. I was dating someone and found a keylogger on my laptop, and I had no experience with malware. This was my first time ever dealing with something like this. And to me, it was shocking. I mean, the indication for me was slow computer, slow internet access. I knew something was up, and I took it to the IT department at my university, and that's how I found it. And ever since then, I've been a lot more aware of digital privacy, and that's why I'm so excited to speak with you about it, because this is really what you focus on, is these types of situations and the legal recourse here, right? I mean, is it illegal for someone to use this type of stalkerware? And
it depends on exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. But it is potentially a violation of the wiretapping statute, depending on what state you're in and whether or not you're looking at one-party or two-party consent. and it's potentially a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Normally, EFF spends a lot of time railing against the CFAA, and we talk about the many ways in which the CFAA is sort of weaponized in order to stop security researchers from doing security research. But you can also use it to prosecute abusers who are using software in order to spy on their former partners.
Yeah,
victims.
and a lot of this is commercial, right? I mean, it's advertised, and it's not really kept secret that this could be used to spy on a spouse or a partner.
Oh yes, absolutely. At the time when I did my TED Talk, it was actually quite common to see this software being advertised as being for catching your cheating spouse. Since I did my TED Talk, and I've done a lot of work on helping companies and the AV industry to crack down on stalkerware, they usually frame it as keep track of your teenagers, or keep your family safe, or something along those lines. But they absolutely know what it's used for. If you take a look at the reviews for these products, you will see frequent mentions of people who covertly installed this software in order to spy on their partners.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the fact that it is so prevalent and easily available is concerning. Is there anything you've seen in terms of attempts to prevent this from becoming so freely available, or is it just kind of the way it is right now?
I mean, there's not a lot that you can do to control the market for side-loaded Android software, as people who work in information security, especially in mobile security, are well aware. What we can do is we can make it more difficult for it to run properly. We can make it easier to detect. And we can also just make it less acceptable for people to do this. Kaspersky a couple years ago did a survey in 20 countries of 20,000 people and asked them whether or not it was okay to use software in order to covertly spy on a partner. And a surprising number of them said that it was.
Really?
And I think something like 10% said essentially that if your partner is cheating, it's completely justified.
Really? Wow. So that's a cultural component, right? Changing, public opinions about this, which is surprising to me that people can think that that's okay when clearly it is not okay. And I guess in the bigger picture of antivirus companies, do they detect stalkerware, or is it pretty difficult?
Antivirus companies do a better job of detecting stalkerware than they used to. Okay. But it's one of those things that you absolutely have to stay on top of all the time because it's a constant cat and mouse game.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about cyber stalking and harassment, because that also kind of ties into this topic. If someone's dealing with harassment online, what are some strategies that they can take to deal with that? Because it can often be kind of overwhelming and hard to navigate.
There are a lot of things that people could do. The first is they should remember that they don't have to face this alone. One of the most common bits of advice that I hear from people who have never been harassed online is just, grow a thicker skin.
Right.
Just log off. You don't have to read this stuff. Just block them. And with really targeted and extended harassment campaigns that involve many people, that's just not advice that people can take, and it's really victim blaming in a way that I think that we should all be moving past in the year of our Lord 2023.
Right.
And so I recommend reaching out to organizations like HeartMob, and there is a guide for sort of surviving harassment online that is aimed mostly at women gamers, because a lot of the discussion around harassment online really has its roots in Gamergate, and that was kind of the template that all harassment online really followed from that moment forward, and which we really ignored it at the time, and we could have learned a lot from that. And I think it's up on the Geek Feminism wiki. Tall Poppy, an organization led by its CEO Lee Honeywell, is also an excellent source of advice on these topics. So there is a lot you can do, but the most important thing to remember is that you're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. And it is, it's not simply growing a thicker skin, like you said, because it's still harassment and it's still something to consider if you're dealing with something like that. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about just intimate privacy violations in general. And one topic that I'm really concerned about is deepfakes, right? And we hear a lot. I think the FBI put out an advisory a month or so ago about a recent rise in pornographic deepfakes and sextortion schemes. Is that something that you're seeing or hearing more about? And what are your thoughts about that becoming a bigger problem potentially?
Oh, absolutely. I have seen this spike in sextortion. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that the sort of pornographic deepfakes sextortion scam is deeply gendered. Women are the people who are being targeted by this form of abuse because you don't have to make porn. You don't have to have posed naked, but just the implication that you have. Or that you have somehow been, spliced into a deep fake of yourself doing porn is considered to be sort of humiliating enough,
right.
And in and of itself, that is harassment. And unfortunately, I think we're really going to see more of these kinds of attacks, and I think they are going to continue to be very strongly gendered.
Definitely. And are you hearing anything about legislation or any type of ideas on how to combat this? Because from what I've seen, there's not a whole lot victims can do once this is already posted online. There's not much that they can do to make sure it's taken down.
Well, non-consensual sharing of pornographic imagery is already illegal. So the good news is
right.
that in some ways there is legal recourse. The bad news is that the law is slow.
Right.
That people frequently do not care about the law because people do illegal things all the time and don't face consequences. The sort of people who are targeted are frequently people who don't have the resources to hire a lawyer, or who do not have good experiences with law enforcement. And as a result, they are disproportionately targeted, and they are disproportionately left helpless in these situations, which is really disturbing.
It is, yeah, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, especially with that advisory, the fact that we're now seeing law enforcement agencies paying attention to this. I think that shows that it is becoming an even larger problem over time. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about AI and large language models like ChatGPT. And I saw that the FTC is now investigating ChatGPT, looking into its practices with the data models that they use to train large language models, and then also the way that user data is stored and processed. Do you have any specific concerns about that, or any ideas on how we can approach AI in order to better protect data?
Well, people at this conference are really excited about the use of AI for training security models. And Splunk has come up with some new products that are incorporating AI. I hate to be an AI doomer, but I think that we should be careful. In the end, the final decision should always be up to a human being, because garbage in, garbage out. If you train AI on data that is racist, that is sexist, you will get racist and sexist results. And if you look at these results and you simply do not question them and you don't look for the bias, all you're going to do is continue perpetrating that bias.
Exactly.
There's also a lot of talk about the images that AI is trained on, and sort of the rights of the artists who make these images. And there's a lot of discussion about their copyright rights. Now, I am very much in favor of artists getting paid, and I am very worried about industries using AI-generated art in order to create sort of crappier okay art and end up not having to pay artists.
Right.
But I am also very concerned about tightening copyright law, because traditionally, copyright law has not been used to benefit artists. In the end, it makes the RIAA rich. It makes the MPAA rich, and somehow the artists themselves only ever see pennies on the dollar. So I think we need to look at some more creative ways in which to make sure that artists get paid, and that we don't just like lower the bar on what kind of art is acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot of possibility with AI, but also a cautious approach, I think, is necessary to make sure that we don't overlook some of these things that can really impact people like artists and really anyone. And so I also wanted to talk just more broadly about approaches to data privacy. A lot of times when I talk to my friends or my family, people outside of this industry, their response is, well, I have nothing to hide, or no one cares about my data. What do you say to that?
I've been training people in sort of data privacy practices for more than a decade. And what I tell them is, you only think you have nothing to hide. And even if you have nothing to hide, does your entire family have nothing to hide? Does everyone that you talk to have nothing to hide? Do all of your associates have nothing to hide? If you have nothing to hide now, maybe you will have something to hide in the next presidential administration. Mm-hmm. Maybe you will have, you are a person who may become pregnant in a state where abortion has been outlawed, and you need an abortion. Maybe you or say your child is trans and would like to have gender affirming health care. There are all kinds of things that can change very, very rapidly. And once you have given up your privacy, you can't claw it back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on as well. And I wanted to ask before we end, if there are any other resources or anywhere people can follow you to learn more about what you're working on and what the EFF's working on?
Well, if you're interested in the work of the EFF, I recommend going to our website, www.eff.org. We have a newsletter called Effector, and you can find me on the burning corpse of Twitter, where I am Evacide, EVACIDE.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. It's always great to hear your perspective on this. So thank you again.
Thank you.